What's up, ego hackers? This is the C.S. Joseph podcast. Welcome to the show. So today's question, another Acolyte question, because I seem to be getting a bunch of those these days. And it just keeps piling on, but it's great. It's always nice to have different content to talk about on top of our regularly scheduled content, which, by the way, speaking of regularly scheduled content, I'm going to be releasing episodes very soon on the YouTube channel and on the podcast relating to the concept known as duality. We're going to be discussing duals from the MBTI perspective and lightly touching on the socionics perspective to try to dispel some of the weird or the bullshit, basically, in terms of how confusing it can be to determine the difference between the two systems and then how they impact relationships, especially sexual relationships, among the 16 types. Besides, we're going to be discussing compatibility and camaraderie, so what's not to love? It's basically going to be, I believe, season 14, part 3. And we're going to be making that available here on the YouTube channel and the podcast. So make sure that you guys are tuning in to that when it comes out. Don't forget, you can also get season 14, part 1, which is the sexuality series. Season 14 is the sexuality season, basically. The first 8 episodes of those are available among the Discover XYZ type, which those are one-time fee. They're available at csjoseph.life/portal and or / just input in whatever type it is, and then you'll get to that page. And then also season 14 part 2 is available on for the members in the members area in the Journeyman premium lectures area. So if you want to make sure that you're up to date on season 14 and the specific relationship content, I suggest you actually get all of that so you have the full story, so that you can continue on with season 14 part 3 when it's released on YouTube and on the podcast. Anyway, today's question, which is actually kind of related to what I was just talking about, related to the content of season 14 in terms of sexuality. It's basically about INFPs and how can you tell if an INFP is being a hoe? And I'm just well, hold on. I have some sub-questions to that. Are we talking INFP men? Are we talking INFP women? How are you defining hoe exactly? Are we using a colloquial definition? Are we going to use urbandictionary.com to define that? What is the entire perspective here of what's being asked? It's funny because I really like it how sometimes the acolytes, they do a little bit of extra research and they add in additional information just to make sure that their question is properly clarified so they can get the most value out of the question, right? So no problem. I'm happy to do whatever. And at least I'm getting some really killer questions recently. That way I don't have to email them back and be hey, could you just give me a different question or a better question, or can you say it a different way? Sometimes they just get too general, or sometimes they can be almost way too specific. Specific as in it's content that we haven't exactly released yet and we're not exactly ready to release it yet. But as soon as we release content, I'm happy to answer questions related to that content as well, which is what we've been doing for Deadly Sins and Living Virtues, and ultimately what we're calling Temple Exploration.
Bring me a chicken wing. Yeah.
Anyway, so the point is, how can you tell if an INFP is being a hoe? How can you tell? Well, let's just answer this question from a two-part perspective. Let's look at INFP males. So first things first, you need to actually look at the virtue and vice of INFPs, which is available at season 7 part 1. Season 7 part 1 is a playlist here on the YouTube and on the podcast. Please check out that playlist. So season 7 part 1, and I believe it's season 7 episode 16, which talks about the virtue and vice of INFPs. Now, when I talk virtue and vice INFPs, I'm not talking about Deadly Sins and Living Virtues. Those are completely different concepts. It's part of Temple Exploration. Virtue and vice is just basically typical neutral behaviors that come as a result of anyone being XYZ type. it's like it's at the layer of their ego and a little bit of their shadow, a little bit of their subconscious, but most of their ego. Whereas temple exploration really focuses on the dyads, the dyad being like, so if you're an INFP ego, the ESTJ is your subconscious. If you're an ESTJ ego, the INFP would be your subconscious. So the ESTJ plus the INFP is the dyad. So for those of you that are just like unaware or confused by the high volume of terminology we actually use, it's not intentional, but I try to stay on point with our terminology. Yes, I know sometimes our terminology changes, and that can be really frustrating to a lot of people, but we try to keep it all up to date whenever possible. So if you're not sure about certain terminology or terms that I use, just stick to the newer videos or just watch them all so you can kind of understand. But worst case, however, everything will eventually be defined and provided in the companion guide. Second edition is about to release. We already have third edition planned, and we're going to be working on third edition very soon. But the second edition will be made available. First edition is available now for free at csjoseph.life. Just scroll down. It's the button that's below Take the Personality Test button. So it's like 3 blocks down from the top. And get companion guide here. Just click that button. You get a copy of the type grid and a lot of explanation as to how the type grid works. But it does not include any of the new temple exploration vectors that we're utilizing for interacting with the type grid when it comes to typing people. Make sure you guys get that resource. So INFPs being hosts. So remember, the virtue and vice of the INFP is loyalty versus treachery, right? And INFPs, especially INFP women, can be insanely treacherous when it comes to being relationships. And I actually disagree with the concept that men can be hoes. They're not really held to that same standard women are, because sexuality is basically the main agency that a woman has in her life. Like, for example, as the author Tomasi would say, you know, this is why when women protest, they always get naked when they're protesting. As, you know, as an example of proving that sexuality is their main agency as a woman, basically, compared to men, not so much. So literally answering this question is like, okay, do you believe is there such thing as a man hoe, basically? The thing is that men are often rewarded and positively reinforced by fellow men for, you know, being a hoe, I guess, and having an exorbitantly high notch count on their bedpost. So, be that as it may, when someone typically says a hoe, I'm actually thinking like, yeah, they're probably most likely referring to a woman and not actually a man. So, and besides, like, INFP men as hoes, I just don't see it. I really don't really see it. Like, INFP men, I mean, visually they typically look unattractive for the most part. They usually don't know how to dress. They have poor performance skills due to their extroverted sensing trickster. And they're not very good at passing shit tests. They don't really understand the concept of peacocking, you know, like the typical game principles that most people would be aware of. And by the way, when I'm talking game principles, like, yeah, these things are discussed in the Mystery Method. They're discussed in Neil Strauss's The Game. But for the most part, I don't really recommend those books anymore. Rational Male Volume 5 basically handles a lot of that and actually brings it in an updated modern format where it actually makes sense. But the point is that INFP men, I guess in general, typically, almost always, like well above 80%. This is well above Pareto principle here. They just lack game. They just entirely lack game. So because of that, these men do not often actually have the opportunity to be a hoe. They don't have high body counts. They don't have high notch counts. So the idea that an INFP man is a hoe, if you're going to label an INFP man a hoe, it's likely not true. It's likely just your ego investments, or maybe you're just having some kind of emotional reaction that's not actually based on fact, because statistically, it's just not likely. I mean, if anyone was to tell me that like an INFP man was being a hoe, I'd just be like, yeah, no. Doesn't happen. Not likely. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's probably like, you know, the top 1% of the 1% of INFP men who are getting like tons of girls and having huge high body counts. Yeah, sure, that can happen. but I've maybe seen that once, maybe twice in my entire life. So no, no. Don't really, I'm not really seeing it. Not really open to that idea. INFP women, however, that's something interesting. So, what causes INFP women being hoes? I mean, other than their just basic, sexual strategy of hypergamy, where a woman throughout her life desires men who provide her different things depending on the circumstances of her life as well as her age. Women have this thing in the back of their head where they realize that they have an expiration date. Their sexuality basically decays over time, and they have to work really, really hard to preserve and slow the progression of the decay towards their sexuality, towards their beauty throughout their life. This is known as the wall. And when they get around about 30 years of age, is usually when they're starting to feel like they are expired. And women in general, when they're about 26, 27, they have this epiphany where they realize that the looks that they had from 18 to 25, they don't have them anymore, and they can no longer compete with younger girls for the absolute best specimen of a man or men out there, best specimens of men out there, the top 4.5% of men. They can't really compete for them anymore. And then usually an epiphany phase is about when they start being hoes, because they end up having a bunch of, they splurge on sexual relationships just to see what their looks, what their beauty, what their sexual market value at that point in time can still get them. Because they realize, oh crap, I'm about to expire, I should probably reproduce. This is why statistically women in general get married in Western society on average at age 29. So at least they could still claim that they got married in their 20s. Hypergamy, their sexual strategy, it's like, hey, I want a really alpha man at this particular time of my life. I want a really beta man at another time of my life. Alpha man being has a strong attitude, doesn't put up with crap from anyone, basically has good genes, very healthy fitness, willing to throw down if necessary, doesn't put up with shit from anyone. Versus the beta male, who provides parental investment, provisioning, protection, money, those kinds of things, right? And ultimately, it's men's responsibility to actually provide both to a woman that he is intending on making the mother of his children to. He is expected to provide both to a woman simultaneously. Most people call this purple pill. I think the blue pill and the red pill are, the alpha versus the beta dichotomy is an important dichotomy, and men just need to learn how to navigate both simultaneously for their own benefit, while never sacrificing oneself, because you don't want to make the red pill your frame. You don't want to make the blue pill your frame. You don't want to sacrifice your own self to any particular side of a woman's hypergamy. It's very important because, for example, I've even known alpha men whose wives have cheated on them with way lesser men, with far more beta men who actually make a lot more money, depending on how their hypergamy changes. But INFP women, that doesn't change. But they can be very, very, very treacherous. And, most people think, men can be hoes too, and it's because the male sexual strategy of polygyny. But that's not actually the case. In general, you can kind of take a man at his word, but you can't really take women at their word, not because they're liars, but because they change their minds constantly. And their emotional perspective, making decisions based on emotions instead of facts, their emotions change on a dime, and as much as their hormones change on a dime. So you can't really judge a woman by what she says, you have to judge her by her actions, which can actually be extremely difficult to do when you're considering an INFP woman, because they're just so unnoticeable. Oftentimes when INFP women cheat or when they're being hoes, you don't really see it coming. You don't really even notice about them. It's actually something that wouldn't even come to mind. And they're going out of their way to hide that side of themselves so desperately because of their X-rated thinking inferior. They are afraid of what other people think of them. And the last thing that they want to deal with is being judged by fellow women as a hoe, because that would put up a warning to men in their life that they are not as sexually viable and not good enough for investment or good enough for a relationship. So they go out of the way to hide it as much as possible so that they do not end up reducing their options. Why? Well, it's because men in general don't want to be committed or in relationships with hoes. Because, if a woman has a history of being a hoe, she's going to remain a hoe and be a hoe later. Statistically, like, risk of divorce and those types of things that men have to deal with get way worse if a woman has more than 2 sex partners in her life, including the man that she is with that he's afraid of her divorcing him, basically. So, the women that are statistically safe are the ones who have 1 or less partners, with you being the second partner that's on their body count list. And those are the women that I would recommend turning into mothers, because statistically, you're not going to get screwed from a divorce perspective. Divorce being something that ultimately destroys the lives of men as we know it. Losing assets, losing access to their own children, paying alimony, etc. Insanely exorbitant and unfair child support, right? These kinds of things are consistent problems over time that men just are not properly educated with managing it. I mean, like, for example, like, marriage is the contract no one gets legal advice on, so that's also a problem. So when it comes to INFP women, they're so subtle and they're so sneaky, it's really hard to tell if they are being hoes. It's really difficult, and it's probably why this question was asked, because it's really hard, because they're so sneaky. They're extremely sneaky. And the thing is, too, is that, like, they'll actually go out of their way to spin a narrative and share that narrative with a bunch of people in order to support their hoish behavior, or maybe their cheating behavior. And it's like mixing truth with lies so that you don't actually know that they're a traitor, that they're being treacherous towards you from a cheating perspective, or that they're loose, that they have a wide variety of sexual partners, and they're always just playing their options, right? And it turns them into this non-committal state. The thing is that oftentimes, INFP women start to realize, with their sloth deadly sin, that it's just easier for them to play their options instead of actually having to commit to an individual man, because if she commits to an individual man, she's going to have to work a lot harder. There's expectations that men have from women in terms of relationships. Like, for example, getting pregnant and having a child. Men like having children predominantly. If men don't like have children, they're either pussies or they're fighting really hard. And, in this society that makes having children too expensive, or, the way that their life is, or they've just bought into a lot of crap, in terms of like, hey, I've been conditioned to think that having children is a bad thing. Which you can oftentimes really figure out. Like, you go down to California, that's their culture there, but then you come up here in Idaho and it's like, yeah, no, bloodlines matter. Men in Idaho really care about their bloodline, whereas in California, men are willing to submit to the psychological conditioning that they've received by society, as is designed by the elite, in order for their bloodlines to end, because the elite's desire is to ultimately end bloodlines while preserving their own. So the people who are way less educated, the far more profane, cattle-like people out there, especially beta males, for example, don't really care that much about their bloodline, because they have been conditioned to think or feel that it is a bad thing to do so, right? Whereas from my perspective, I very much care about my bloodline. That's why I will continue to have children, potentially indefinitely. I don't care. Like, if I have 12 children, so be it. I have 12 children, and I'll love each of them and care for each of them and raise each of them accordingly. No problem. Children are super, super important, and they teach you a lot of lessons. And having a bloodline, your family, is a support structure that you would never have anywhere else, especially in this society. And men already don't really have a support structure, so men have to actually create a support structure within the context of their own family, but also amongst the men in their life. And that was a tangent, so let's get back on topic. So, INFP women, like, how do you tell? Well, the thing is that, like, the first indicator that it's literally split attention. You look at what they put their attention on. Do they have a bunch of male friends? Are they splitting their attention that they have for themselves with a bunch of male friends in their life, right? That is a huge indicator that they might actually be a hoe. Are they texting men, or do they talk to men? Like, what does their Instagram look like? It's not hard, go look at their Instagram. Go look at their Facebook. What are they doing on social media? Do they have an OnlyFans? That's a huge red flag, right? Do they tell different things to different people, which happens a lot with INFPs. INFPs are very good at wearing masks and telling people different narratives. And keeping track of the different narratives that they tell certain people is also something that they're very capable of doing. It's kind of interesting because you can see ENTP women doing that as well, and ENTP women are the masters of that. But that's not to say that INFP women are not just as capable, because they really are. They understand narrative than anyone else, especially when they're going out of their way to absolve themselves or potentially generate excuses, or at least outsource power and authority to other people, especially women in their life who would always run for them and bolster their reputation. Because to them, it's all about managing their reputation. So if you look at a woman who is exhibiting typical hoish behavior, having a wide variety of male friends, texting them consistently, talking to them on social media, or they are speaking to men on a regular basis when they go out in public, especially in like a bar scene or whatever sexualized zone that is, could be a club, etc. Whereas like it probably wouldn't happen so much in the workplace, because men are very conditioned to not approach a woman at all from a relationship perspective at all in the workplace. But it's like, but they're highly encouraged to do so in the bar scene, for example, or a club scene, right? All these things count. All of these things matter, right? So the reality of the situation ends up becoming like, if she's exhibiting these general behaviors, you likely have a hoe on your hand. You likely do. And like, this actually happened to my father-in-law. He was in the military. He ended up marrying this INFP girl. He had a child with her, but she cheated on him multiple times. And she ended up becoming a total hoe, because from her perspective, it's like, hey, yeah, being committed is great, but he's not really around. I don't really feel wanted. I want to feel wanted by other people. I want to be respected by men in general. Because these INFP hoes, they really end up tacking on their self-worth based on how much men in general respect them. And if they have a volume of men where they feel that these men respect them, or at least regard them in some capacity, sometimes they fantasize in their FI hero delusions, and just, it's like, hey, these men, they want me and they respect me, and I have sex with them, and multiple times I'm playing my options, etc. And then it's like they end up feeling special. They end up feeling powerful, like they have some kind of power over men in the process. But that's not accurate at all. It really just isn't accurate. But they all think that that's how it works. And it's like, no, it's not. It's just you trying to cope with your feelings of powerlessness, and you're trying to utilize playing your sexual options as a way for you to feel less powerless in your life. Because are you truly desirable enough to actually have a man commit to you? I mean, because women control access to sexuality as much as men control access to relationships or committed relationships, right? And are these hoes really getting it? No, they're taking the easy road. They're taking the slothful, easy road of, I'm just going to play my options, because if I have to cook and clean, if I have to, put a man above myself, then that makes me less of a woman, especially in today's feminized society, in today's feminized environment. And that could be a huge problem. Literally, these women, these INFP hoes, are walking around feeling bad about themselves, feeling like lesser women if they have to commit to a man, if they have to put in the effort that it takes to actually keep a man. So because they're slothful, they'd rather play their options instead of, and by the way, they won't have options forever. They won't. Like as soon as they get in their early 30s, their options, like they start, like usually when they hit like 27, their options start going down and down, and their options will decay for like the rest of their life. When they really need to realize is that investing into one man, a man that they know they're compatible with, a man that they trust, a man that is willing to jump through all of her hoops to make her feel wanted, and is a man who respects himself such that he does not respect her more than himself, but she still respects her as a secondary behavior, not a primary behavior. A primary behavior of self-respect is more important. At that point in time, perhaps she could actually be comfortable in being in a committed relationship. But if she's a hoe, she's not going to be comfortable. And then that treacherous vice that INFPs have end up coming out. And it's like, from their perspective, hey, I want this guy because he provides me alpha traits. I want that guy because he provides me beta traits. And they're never actually able to consolidate on both. And every time they use this temporary fix to help them get over their feelings of powerlessness by playing their options, they actually intrinsically reduce their value as women and end up making it that much harder, especially since their sexual reputation will be there indefinitely, as much as they try to hide. And they're very good at hiding it, but eventually someone will figure it out. Once they've been figured out, it's like, oh crap, I've just reduced my option at having a high value man, because they're continuing to reduce their own value by increasing their body count over time. A lot of women out there are offended by this on a consistent basis. When the thing is, though, is that like a man doesn't want to invest in a woman who has so much emotional baggage from other men. When women have a sexual relationship with a man, they catch feelings. It's because the neurotransmitters, like oxytocin, for example, they catch feelings. And it's really hard for them to let go. And they'll always think back, especially like if you're a beta man, you get married to some INFP hoe, and she'll always remember all that alpha cock she used to have in her early 20s and eventually want to go back to that because you're not man enough. You're not manning up, right? And because you're not manning up, she's actually more likely to become treacherous as a result. And how they get treacherous? Look at who they talk to. How many men in their life do they talk to? It's one of the things, like, you know, I look at their bronze pair, like the ESTP. I often know like subconscious focused ESTP women, for example, once they decide, oh, this is the man I want, typically they don't really talk to other men. They don't interact with other men. They actually prevent with any demon, using their any demon to prevent communication that they would have, potential communication that they would have with other men. They actually go out of the way to do that. Does your INFP woman, or does this INFP woman that you're thinking of, is she actually giving or allowing every opportunity available to her to actually be able to interact with men? If she does, and if she's not actively taking action, remember, you can't judge a woman by what she says. You can only judge a woman by how she acts. If she's not taking concrete action to slow down or prevent communication with other men in her life, well, guess what? She's a hoe. You should probably not invest in her anymore. If she's not willing to delete her Instagram, if she's not willing to get off Facebook, if she's not willing to, make those decisions, guess what? She's a hoe. You shouldn't be in a relationship with her. It's not hard, okay? So, my recommendation, guys, avoid hoes. If you're like spinning plates, having multiple sexual relationships simultaneously, great, do that. Just understand that the INFP hoe would just be a plate for you, but she's not someone that you wife up. She's not someone you commit to. Yeah, sure, men that wife up women often, do the Ephesians chapter 5 thing, or the whole present the bridegroom presents his bride to himself without stain or blemish, as it goes biblically, which is basically a man forgiving a woman of her sexual past. Yeah, that's fine. The thing is, though, is that if you're not going to take responsibility and actually realize that because she was a hoe in her past, she's likely going to be a hoe later, especially when she hits development phase, which usually starts about 35, 36 years of age, and she starts desiring the alphas she used to have in her past. That's a huge problem. You don't want to have that problem. Because all of a sudden you got a loose woman on your hands. And let me tell you, as much as women are afraid of being raped, and the amount of pain that they suffer when they are raped is the same exact amount of pain a man suffers when he is cucked. When she has a sexual relationship with another man that is not you who were committed to her, and she was supposed to be committed to you. That is literally how you rape a man. Cucking a man is the same as raping a woman. It is the same. I don't care what anyone says. And if you think differently, you're full of shit. So, understand, like, these are the consequences. These are some of the things that you can look for with their behavior, but it really comes down to, are they eliminating opportunities? So you look at, like, sunk cost, opportunity cost. Are they eliminating opportunities for them to interact with other men other than you? That's the first question you ask. Next is, what men are they talking to in their life, and why? Why are they talking to them? What are they getting out of it, right? Are they getting their little TE, oh look, I'm important because this man is talking to me thing? Like, do they put a lot of value? They should be placing more value on you, their man, talking to them themselves, not other men or men in general. They should not be staking their self-worth based on other men talking to them. It should only be them staking their self-worth based on how you interact with her individually. If not, well then guess what? She's being a hoe. So you don't want to have any, you don't want to invest in women like that, like at all. Like, you want to have nothing to do with women like that. It's funny, they think like downtown here is like the best place to race, apparently. So, but yeah, folks, that's in general how I would answer this question. So, thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.